Hey, I'm Jay, and you're listening to Mindset Monday, a new series on the More Than podcast created to be the perfect dose of inspiration and motivation while giving you tangible tools to shift your mindset in a more positive direction. After all, your life is only as good as your mindset. I'm so glad you're here. What's up, fam? Welcome back to another Mindset Monday episode. If you're watching this episode, you'll see I'm not recording in our gorgeous studio today. Instead, I am at home in my office in my cozy clothes because it's been a rainy and gloomy day. The sun is just now starting to come out finally at 5 o'clock. And I've been doing an admin day, getting ready for our episodes next week. And I just felt really inspired to pick up a mic and film this episode old school style, the way that we used to do all of our More Than podcast episodes, and just talk to you guys about the many thoughts swirling through my mind right now. Often when I come to you guys with an incomplete thought of something that I'm passionate about or something that I'm currently working through, it's when it resonates the most with you guys. I love this podcast so much because we're able to highlight stories of multifaceted women and showcase that in 2024, it's beautiful to be multifaceted. It's incredible to be multifaceted. But we're also living in a weird time where we can have an entitled white male that makes $4 million to kick a ball, go to a commencement speech and cause so much division and so much frustration because he simply is devaluing the worth of women if they're not mothers and wives. If you don't know what I'm talking about and you haven't heard the Harrison Butker commencement speech, I'm sure you've seen snippets on TikTok. People all over the news are talking about it. There was a lot of controversial things that he said within his speech because he was emboldened to come from a place of, this is my religious belief, therefore this is right. And anybody that says otherwise is wrong. And the point of his speech was to really showcase the ideals of Catholicism. And I think he did that. And there's a lot of people that will disagree with the outrage that's coming from how controversial people viewed this speech. It just got my wheels turning and my blood boiling all at the same time. Even now, with all of the quote unquote progress that we've made as women, we are still having our worth dictated by who we marry. Now, unlike Harrison, I'm not saying in any way that my view on this is right. Your view is wrong if you don't agree with me. I'm simply just speaking about this from the perspective of a woman who is married, but is also very ambitious in her career, who's not a mother, and who was offended throughout the speech. And I'm offended not for myself. I'm offended because we have so many young women, especially the women that were sitting in that audience, that have worked their ass off for 4 years to get their degree, that are excited to go into the next chapter of their life. And yet you have a keynote speaker basically saying, yeah, that's all great and all to have those ambitions and to want to have that success. But the most important vocation you'll ever have is motherhood. And I see both sides of this argument because there's a lot of women who are upset now saying, yeah, motherhood is a vocation. It's the hardest job in the world. And there's a lot of women who do find fulfillment and their purpose in those roles. And then on the opposite side of the equation, you have women that don't want to be defined by those roles. And a lot of women who also don't want to have their life's purpose in having children or in getting married. And so now we just have women pitted against each other, which is always the worst place to be because we have a man that was speaking on behalf of women. This happens all the time. We've seen it happen all the time, but it's frustrating as hell for me to come on and always talk about building up your self-worth and your self-esteem and the fact that you are inherently worthy and good enough and valuable as you are. And yet you have somebody like that come on and say, not really. Not unless you fulfill these two very important things. And it's always frustrating for me that people will hide behind religion as a way to devalue other people. And it happens all the time. People love to bend biblical texts to have it fit their narrative and fit their agendas. And I've talked on here many times about how I'm a woman of faith. It is so infuriating to me, especially for people who didn't grow up around faith, who are unfamiliar with faith, that they hear stuff like this and hear messages like that, and it's so demeaning, and it's so combative, and it's so confusing. And I just feel like it's such a way to manipulate what is supposed to be viewed as God's love, as a way of like, yeah, well, you're only good enough and you'll only have salvation if you do X, Y, and Z. That's wrong. And if you're one of those people that you want to explore faith, but you're terrified because of stuff like this, please don't let it scare you away. However, there are a lot of people that hold the same mindset. There's a lot of people that want the traditional old school values that we used to have to come back in full force, for women to have similar roles to what we used to have. We're seeing it play out in legislation right now. We're seeing it play out in politics, and it's become extremely divisive. And this is just another example of how divisive it's becoming over this guy's very conservative speech. For those of you who have not listened to the speech yet, you don't really need to, but I'll break down some of the key points so you can understand where I'm coming from. It's a 20-minute speech. And like I said, he intended to shine the light on his Catholic ideals, which I think he did that. But at the same time, he managed to degrade women, offend multiple people groups, and just kept reinforcing this idea that a woman's worth is tied to just being a mother and a wife. And I say that because he literally says verbatim, "For the ladies present today, congratulations on an amazing accomplishment. You should be proud of all that you've achieved to this point in your young lives. I want to speak directly to you briefly because I think it is you, the women, who have had the most diabolical lies told to you." Intense. How many of you are sitting here now about to cross the stage and are thinking about all the promotions and titles you're going to get in your career? Some of you may go on to lead successful careers in the world, but I would venture to guess that the majority of you are most excited about your marriage and the children you will bring into this world. I can tell you that my beautiful wife would be the first to say that her life truly started when she began living her vocation as a wife and as a mother. There's a lot to unpack in just a very short sentiment. But to say this to women on their graduation day, time and place, buddy. This is probably not the time to say, hey, congrats on the last 4 years. You should be so proud of yourself. And maybe some of you will go on to lead successful careers, but never forget that the most incredible and important vocation you'll ever have is just of a wife and as a mother. And then he speaks on behalf of his wife, saying that that's what she thinks. And there's a good chance that, yeah, she does think that. But again, time and place. Why are you bringing that up on their commencement day? It's just reinforcing that idea that their accomplishments up until this point doesn't really matter. And also that their life doesn't really matter until they get married and they have children. Now, I can speak as a married woman that I was engaged to my husband for 2 years. Prior to that, we were dating for 6 years. The amount of times that I heard from people, what's wrong? When are you guys getting engaged? When are you going to get married? When do you want to be a mother? What's the holdup? People were so concerned about it. The second you get engaged, when's the wedding? When do you guys want to have kids? They're so consumed with it. The second we got married, so when are you going to have kids? When are you going to have kids? And it was a constant frustration for me because I've been building this company that I'm very passionate about, that I get so much purpose from. And one of the many parts of me as a human being is a wife. And I love being a wife. I love my husband so freaking much. I love this aspect. But this isn't the whole picture. That's just one small part of who I am. But yet that's something that people fixate on so much. And I do think people, well-intended people, ask that solely because that's just the way that society has set it up, that you're on this strict timeline. And if you're not abiding by that timeline, something must be wrong. And women should have the right to be able to decide on their own timeline, even if it doesn't look the way that it looks for other people, and to have that be respected. But when it's being broadcasted on a day that's so important to you, it's just reinforcing that timeline. And this speech was only given to less than 500 students. It's been viewed over 600,000 times now on the internet. Think about the messaging that sends. About how that impacts young women, even these college-age women. But let's take it a step further. Harrison has a daughter. He's literally going to raise a young girl believing that her worth is attached to whether or not she becomes a wife or a mom. What if she wants to be career-driven, just like her grandma? She wants to be a physicist. Are you going to tell her that vocation doesn't matter as much as being a wife or a mom, or that her life doesn't truly start until she becomes those two things? And if we take it a step further, what if she struggles to be able to become a mom because she's physically unable to? Because he also talked in his speech about abortion, surrogacy, and IVF. Talked all about how it's not within God's plan for us to try and orchestrate pregnancy. I don't think he understands that the reason that a lot of people have to use IVF is because they have physical struggles getting pregnant. Your entitlement really comes across because you clearly have never dealt with the heartbreak or the pain that comes from building a family, or the pain a woman feels in wanting to become a mom and not being physically able to become one. I know what that pain feels like firsthand after going through my miscarriage. It's not something that is easy for any woman to be able to navigate. And it's just ignorant statements like this that get my blood boiling. If I believed that my sole worth came from being a mom or a wife, I would be completely crushed by not having that at this stage of my life, or not being physically able to have that yet. It's just a dumb, ignorant thing to say. There's another video that I saw on TikTok, and I'm sure she meant this to come across just as a joke, but it ended up being a conversation that a lot of women were resonating with, where this woman said, "My life actually ended when I became a wife and a mom because they're my full identity now." And that's a sentiment that I know so many women can relate to, because when you become a mom, you go through such an identity crisis. And I know from all my mom friends that you discover a whole new side to yourself once you enter motherhood, but that doesn't negate who you are as a human being on top of it. And I feel like so often we put so much focus on just the kids that we forget about the woman that's still standing there trying to pick up the pieces and figure out who she is and rebuild her identity. And we have a whole lot of women that feel like they no longer have worth just as a human being. That's a much bigger conversation that I think deserves far more of our attention on here. And if you're somebody that's listening right now that can relate to that, or know somebody in your life that has also gone through that struggle, like I know I have, reach out to your mom friends. Check on them. Make sure they are doing okay. Involve them in plans that don't just involve their kids. It's important that you have relationships outside of just your family. It's important that you're fostering all the different elements that build up your identity. That's when my messaging of being multifaceted really comes into play, because when you lose yourself, when you lose your identity, it can be so overwhelming to even know where to pick up the pieces. And you're often applauded from society, from messaging like this commencement speech, that you're doing the right thing because you're a wife, you're a mom. That's the most important thing. Like, put your head down and keep going. Well, if we have a whole bunch of unhappy people, who are they really serving at that point? I think it's so important to foster who you are as a human being above who you are as a wife or as a mom. There's an analogy that one of our guests brought on the show that I absolutely loved, where she viewed her family like she would a business, where she was at the top. She needed to take care of herself, make sure that she was pouring into herself, showing herself love before then showing up for her marriage, so that there was a strong marriage that could be reflected to the kids, so that they could see a strong household. And then she poured herself into her kids. And I think that's a beautiful way to look at it, but I think it's so backwards and counterintuitive to the way that a lot of people pour into their families. I obviously am not the most equipped person to be talking on this because I am not a mom. I haven't experienced the struggles that come with that identity crisis yet. But from what I'm seeing from women in my life that I know are, and also the responses on that video were so overwhelming how many people are feeling that and could relate to that. So it's important to just keep encouraging the women around us that you are so much more than a mom. You are more than a wife. Your life doesn't just start when you become those two things. And if you're one of our listeners that isn't either one of those two things, that's okay. Not placing so much attention on this very traditional and archaic way of thinking. And unfortunately, that's what's being pushed more than anything. And I hope that this episode can remind you that just because that's what we're being surrounded by right now doesn't mean that's what's right. I know you already know this, but your worth is not attached to anybody else. It's not attached to what you achieve. It's not attached to outside validation. It has to start and end with you. It's all internal. So take time this week to pour into yourself and also check on the women in your life. Encourage them to do the exact same thing because, let's face it, there's a whole lot of stupidity happening around us and we have to stick together. I think it's amazing that we're able to use social media to showcase so many different viewpoints and so many different opinions, and we can see what aligns with us and what doesn't align with us. But the most important way to actually let your values be shown is in the way that you vote. And I'm not aligning with any particular political party. I don't love the two that we have to choose from. However, the most important way that you can make your voice heard is by paying attention to what's actually going on, because this mindset is very much aligned with a political party and is pushing an agenda. And if that doesn't align with you, you have to pay attention. It's a really big year, and it's important that our eyes are open and that we are as educated as we possibly can be about these topics so that we can push our society in the direction we actually want to go instead of taking one step forward and 10 steps back. Now, if this episode at all resonated with you guys and you want to continue the conversation, please reach out to me on social media, share it with a friend. Make sure you are following the More Than Show, leave a rating and a review. And we'll be back on Thursday with an amazing guest episode. And I'll see you next Monday for another Mindset Monday.